Pastor Vance, step away from the groundbreaking display.
This is a church lobby. Why are officers here before service?
Report concerns about the restricted building fund.
Concerns are not crimes, and church projects get delayed all the time.
Terrence Vance operated as the founding pastor of Living Vine Fellowship for over a decade, the trusted face of a $500,000 promise his congregation never stopped believing in. What you are about to see is the moment that promise collapsed.
The allegation is roughly $500,000.
Well, allegation is the word because I have not been tried and I'm not confessing in front of my sanctuary.
He would not finish the sermon series. He would not break ground. He would not, in fact, walk out of that office under his own power. Within 48 hours, every account associated with Pastor Terrence Vance had been frozen. Every signature card had been pulled, and a forensic accountant the elders had hired in secret was sitting in a conference room with a stack of bank statements that told a single story. 3 years, $500,000, a building that never broke ground. A coastline in Florida he had been quietly living on while his congregation kept tucking white envelopes into the offering plate marked Building Fund. Quick question, and be honest with me. When you give to a church, a charity, a ministry, do you ever wonder where that money actually ends up? Drop your answer below, and if you are new here, hit subscribe. We cover the cases where trust gets weaponized, and we cover them every single week. Terrence Edward Vance was born in October of 1966 in Birmingham, Alabama, in a small brick house off 28th Street North. His father worked the open hearth at Sloss Furnaces until the plant began winding down, then took a maintenance job at a hospital and kept it until the day he retired. His mother taught second-grade Sunday school at 16th Street Baptist for 31 years and could quote the Beatitudes in order without opening a book. They were not poor, exactly, but every dollar had a name on it before it ever entered the house. Terrence was the middle of 3 boys. The older brother went into the Air Force. The younger one became a high school band director in Mobile. Terrence, by every account from cousins and neighbors interviewed years later, was the one who talked. He talked his way out of fights on the way home from school. He talked himself into the gifted track in 7th grade. By the time he was 15, he was leading the Wednesday night youth devotional at his mother's church, and old women who had been listening to preachers for 60 years were telling each other that the Vance boy had something on him. He graduated from Ramsey High in 1984 and enrolled at Beulah Heights Bible College in Atlanta on a partial scholarship and a stack of pledges from his mother's congregation. He waited tables at a soul food place on Cascade Road to cover the rest. The dean of students at the time wrote in a recommendation letter that Terrence Vance was, quote, intellectually curious, exceptionally gifted as a public speaker, and possessed of a pastoral instinct that exceeded his years. He graduated in 1989. He was 22 years old. His first assignment was an associate pastor role at a small AME church in East Point, Georgia, where he made $18,000 a year and learned how to bury people. He stayed for 4 years. He met his wife Yolanda there. She was a public school nurse working at a clinic on Cleveland Avenue. They married in 1992 at her mother's house with 22 people in the living room and a sheet cake from Kroger. Their son, Caleb, was born the following spring. In 1994, he was offered the senior pastor position at a storefront congregation in College Park called New Beginnings Christian Center. 28 members. A converted dry cleaner with the press equipment still bolted to the floor in the back. He took the job at $22,000 a year. Within 4 years, the congregation had outgrown the storefront, then a school cafeteria, then a rented Knights of Columbus Hall. In 2002, Terrence Vance left New Beginnings to plant his own ministry. He called it Living Vine Fellowship. He started with 31 people in the cafetorium of a middle school in Stonecrest, on the eastern edge of Metro Atlanta. He preached in his shirt sleeves. He shook every hand. He kept attendance on a yellow legal pad. By the end of the first year, there were 200 regulars. By 2008, there were 1,100. By 2015, Living Vine had bought 37 acres off Panola Road, built a 3,000-seat sanctuary with a coffee bar and a children's wing, and was running 4 services every Sunday morning. Membership crossed 4,000 the following spring. Pastor Vance was the face of all of it. the website, the podcast, the Wednesday devotional clips on Instagram, the annual men's conference at the Georgia World Congress Center. A regional Christian radio station ran his Sunday sermon every weekday at lunchtime. He drove a leased Range Rover, lived in a 5-bedroom house in a gated section of Lithonia, and pulled a declared salary of $210,000 a year, plus a housing allowance and a discretionary fund that the elders signed off on without ever quite reading. His wife had stopped working in 2009. His son was a senior at Howard University by 2015. By every external measure, Terrence Vance had built something. By every external measure, he was exactly what he appeared to be. That was the surface. Underneath it, something else had already started. To understand what Pastor Vance did, you have to understand how money moves through a church the size of Living Vine. And you have to understand a category of donation called the restricted gift. When a member writes a check to a church and marks it for the general offering, that money goes into the operating account. It pays the electric bill. It covers staff salaries. It buys hymnals and communion cups and toilet paper. The board has discretion to spend it on essentially anything the church does. A restricted gift is different. A restricted gift is money the donor has given for one specific purpose, and one specific purpose only. A scholarship fund, a mission trip to Honduras, a new HVAC system, and, most commonly in growing churches, a building fund. Under both Georgia nonprofit law and the accounting standards that govern religious organizations, restricted gifts are legally and ethically untouchable for any purpose other than the one the donor designated. If a member writes a check to Living Vine Fellowship and marks it Building Fund, that money cannot be used to pay the light bill. It cannot be used to cover payroll. It cannot be used for a Christmas bonus, a mission trip, a printer, or a pastor's salary. It can be used for the building, period. In larger denominations, restricted funds are supervised by layers of accountability: a bishop, a presbytery, a denominational treasurer, an external auditor every year. In independent, non-denominational megachurches, those layers do not exist. The only accountability is whatever structure the church itself chooses to set up. Living Vine Fellowship had a board of elders, 9 men, most of them owners of small businesses, retired educators, civic leaders, decent men. But none of them were accountants. None of them had the time to audit a multi-million-dollar operation. They met twice a month in a conference room above the lobby. They reviewed summary reports. They asked questions when something looked off. And they trusted Pastor Vance because Pastor Vance had built the church around them and had never given them a reason not to. The building fund had been established in 2018 when Pastor Vance announced from the pulpit that Living Vine had outgrown its sanctuary. The vision was a new worship center, 7,000 seats, with a youth chapel, an event hall, a coffee shop, and a wraparound parking deck. The land had already been bought, a parcel adjacent to the existing campus. The capital campaign was christened Rise. The first Sunday, members pledged $1.2 million. By the end of the first year, the building fund balance was over $2.5 million, and Pastor Vance had sole signing authority over it. That had been written into the campaign documents from the beginning, on the recommendation of an outside consulting firm the elders had hired to structure the fundraising. The consultant had explained that a single point of authorization streamlined large transactions, kept contractor payments from getting bottlenecked in board meetings, and was a common arrangement in capital campaigns of this size. The elders had signed off. They had not asked who would audit the signer. No one noticed. No one checked. Not for almost 3 years. The first unauthorized transfer happened on a Tuesday morning in November of 2020. Pastor Vance logged into the church's online banking portal from his office, transferred $18,000 from the Living Vine Fellowship Building Fund to the church's general operating account, and 3 days later cut a check from the operating account to a vendor identified on the memo line as Pastoral Housing Allowance Reimbursement. The check was made out to himself. That $18,000 paid for the first month of a 6-month rental on a 4-bedroom beach house in Rosemary Beach, Florida, on the stretch of Florida 30A, where the rental rates run higher than the mortgage on most houses in Stonecrest. The house had a private boardwalk to the sand, a heated pool, and a chef's kitchen. The lease was signed in Pastor Vance's name. The cleaning service knew him by his first name within a month. He told Yolanda it was a sabbatical retreat house for ministry recovery, paid for by the church as part of the senior pastor's wellness allowance. He told the elders it was pastoral housing, line item already in the budget. He told the congregation nothing. By February of 2021, he had transferred another $62,000. By the end of that year, the total amount moved from the building fund into accounts he controlled had crossed $140,000. He bought a 2021 Range Rover Sport, traded in the leased one, paid the difference in cash. He took Yolanda to Cabo for their 29th anniversary and stayed at a resort in Pedregal that charged $1,800 a night. He coded the trip as a ministry retreat, logged it as a leadership development expense, and submitted no itinerary. The mechanism was always the same, a transfer from the restricted building fund to the unrestricted operating account, where it briefly mixed with general tithes. A reimbursement check, a vendor payment, or a credit card payoff drawn from the operating account a few days later, with a memo line that read like a normal church expense. Pastoral housing, conference travel, ministry retreat, continuing education, vision casting offsite. The general accounts books closed every month. The elders saw summary numbers. They did not see the choreography. And here is what made it work. The building was always almost happening. Every spring at Vision Sunday, Pastor Vance stood on the platform with an architect's rendering on the big screen behind him and announced an updated groundbreaking date. In April of 2021, he said the shovels would be in the ground by that fall. In the fall, he said permitting had been delayed, but spring of 2022 was certain. In the spring of 2022, he announced a redesigned footprint and a revised date of October. In October, he said the contractor had run into a steel supply issue, but the team was now weeks, not months, from breaking ground. By the spring of 2023, 3 years into the capital campaign, he was telling his elders that he had personally walked the site with the project manager, and that the first ceremonial shovel of dirt would be turned by the end of the calendar year. There was a real architect. There were real renderings. There had been real preliminary site work, a soil study, a stormwater plan. He had spent enough on those things to make the file folder look thick. The church's lobby had a glass display case with a chrome ceremonial shovel in it, mounted on a velvet board, waiting. He referenced the shovel in sermons. He took photos with it in the church newsletter. He called it the most expensive piece of furniture in the building and laughed when he said it. But there was no contractor under contract. There was no construction loan being drawn down. There were no permits actively in process. By March of 2023, the building fund balance, which should have been north of $3 million after 5 years of dedicated giving, was sitting at just under $1.5 million. The elders had not asked to see the line item ledger in over 14 months. Why would they? The pastor said it was coming. He had never lied to them before. He had photographed every transfer confirmation page and saved them in a folder on his personal laptop labeled House. By May of 2023, the folder contained 91 screenshots. We are about to get to the part where someone finally started counting. Before we do, if this video has held your attention this far, that is because the story deserved to be told properly. Subscribe if you agree. We cover cases like this every single week, and the next one might be from your own hometown. Her name was Marisol Reeves. She was 44 years old, a certified public accountant who had worked 12 years in the audit division of a regional accounting firm in Atlanta before transitioning to a corporate controller role at a healthcare company in Lithonia. She had been a member of Living Vine Fellowship since 2009. She and her husband had been married at the church. Their 2 children had been dedicated there. In January of 2023, the church administrator put out a call from the pulpit for volunteers to help the finance ministry. Membership had grown faster than the back office could keep up with. They needed people who could count offering. They needed people who could reconcile the children's wing petty cash. They needed, the administrator said, a few sets of eyes from folks who do this kind of work professionally. Marisol Reeves signed up that afternoon. For the first 2 months, she did exactly what they asked her to do. She counted Sunday offerings with a partner. She entered tithing receipts into the database. She reconciled the deposit slips. It was unpaid work, 2 evenings a week, and she did it because she believed in what Living Vine was building. In early March, the finance ministry's volunteer coordinator handed her the building fund's quarterly statement and asked if she would mind reviewing it for the next board packet. The coordinator was a retired school teacher who, by her own admission, was good with people, not with numbers. Marisol took the statement home. She put her kids to bed. She sat at her kitchen table and ran the math. She had been at Living Vine long enough to remember every Vision Sunday since 2018. She had given to the building fund herself, a recurring monthly draft of $200. She knew what the campaign had raised, because the running total had been announced from the pulpit every quarter. She knew what the budget for the new sanctuary was, because Pastor Vance had said it from the platform more than once. The math was supposed to be simple. It was not simple. The balance on the statement was $1,472,000. By her own back-of-the-envelope calculation, after 5 years of recurring monthly giving from a membership of 4,000, with 2 major capital pushes and at least 1 large estate gift, she specifically remembered being announced. The building fund should have been holding closer to $3 million too, maybe more. She thought first that she was wrong. She thought second that there were withdrawals she did not know about, contractor deposits, soil studies, architect retainers. So she went back the next evening and asked the finance office for the transaction ledger for the building fund, going back 24 months. The volunteer coordinator gave her the printout without thinking twice. She found 91 transfers from the restricted building fund to the general operating account. None of them lined up with any contractor invoice she could identify. Several of them were timed within 48 hours of high-dollar discretionary checks paid out to the senior pastor. One transfer in particular, dated April 18th of 2022, was for $41,000. The Sunday before that transfer, from the pulpit, Pastor Vance had announced that the groundbreaking for the new sanctuary was, in his exact words, almost here. Marisol Reeves put the printout in a manila folder. She did not tell her husband. She slept poorly. The next morning she drove to the office of Deacon Wendell Pryor, the chair of the elder board, who ran a state farm agency on Wesley Chapel Road, and she handed him the folder. He stared at it for a long time. He said, "Are you sure?" She said, "I am sure." He said, "Do not tell anyone. Not yet." Deacon Pryor did the one thing that ended up costing Pastor Vance everything. He hired a forensic accountant before he ever confronted the pastor. The accountant's name was Calvin Mosley. He was a partner at a small Atlanta firm that specialized in nonprofit and religious organization audits, with a reputation for discretion and for documentation that held up in court. Deacon Pryor met him at a coffee shop in Decatur, paid the initial retainer out of his own pocket, and asked him to do a forensic review of every dollar that had moved through the Living Vine Fellowship Building Fund since its creation in 2018. He gave Mosley access to bank records under the Elder Board's authority. He did not tell Pastor Vance the review was happening. Mosley took 11 days. What he produced was a 43-page report, accompanied by a spreadsheet with 1 row for every transaction in or out of the building fund from inception forward. The summary section ran 4 paragraphs and used language so careful it could have been read on the witness stand without a single edit. It identified 91 unauthorized transfers, totaling $496,000 and change. It traced the destination of each transfer through the general operating account and onto specific endpoints. A vacation rental account in Walton County, Florida, a Range Rover dealership in Buford, a resort in Cabo San Lucas, a boutique in Buckhead, a jeweler at Lenox Square, a second beach rental, this one a 6-month lease on a different property at Inlet Beach. Mosley flagged one transaction in particular as Exhibit A, April 18th, 2022. $41,000 moved from the restricted building fund to the operating account at 9:42 in the morning. At 11:01 the same morning, a check was cut from the operating account in the amount of $40,750, payable to a property management company in Santa Rosa Beach, Florida. The memo line read, Pastoral Retreat Facility. 2 days earlier, on the Sunday morning, Pastor Vance had stood at the pulpit of Living Vine Fellowship and told 4,000 people that the groundbreaking on the new sanctuary was, his words, almost here. Family, almost here. Mosley delivered the report on a Thursday evening. Deacon Pryor called an emergency closed meeting of the elder board for Saturday morning. 6 of the 9 elders attended. 3 were out of town and were briefed by phone. The vote to refer the matter to law enforcement was unanimous. By Monday morning, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Unit had been contacted. A special agent named Renata Holloway was assigned to the case that afternoon. Agent Holloway requested and received bank records under subpoena from 3 institutions. She interviewed Marisol Reeves. She interviewed Calvin Mosley. She interviewed Deacon Pryor and 4 other elders. She pulled Pastor Vance's personal credit card statements and matched them against the discretionary fund checks. She found a recurring pattern of credit card payoffs from the discretionary account, made in lump sums in the same week as building fund transfers, with no business documentation supporting the charges. She pulled the lease documents on both Florida properties. She obtained statements from the property management companies. She established that Pastor Vance had spent 49 separate nights at the Rosemary Beach property in calendar year 2022 alone, none of them coinciding with any church mission trip, conference, or pastoral leave on file. She found his personal laptop folder labeled House during the search of his office. 91 screenshots, each one a confirmation page from the church's online banking portal showing a transfer from the building fund. Time-stamped, dated, saved by his own hand. The smoking gun was already there. He had collected it himself. The arrest happened on a Thursday afternoon in May in Pastor Vance's office at Living Vine Fellowship. He had been told by the elder board chair that the board wanted to meet with him at 3 o'clock to discuss the upcoming summer schedule. He arrived a few minutes early in a charcoal suit with no tie, carrying a leather portfolio and a travel mug of coffee. The board was not in the conference room. Agent Renata Holloway was, with 2 GBI investigators and a Stonecrest Police Department officer in uniform. The body cam belonged to the uniformed officer. The footage runs 11 minutes. Agent Holloway. Pastor Vance, please have a seat. I am Special Agent Holloway with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. These are my colleagues. We need to talk to you about some financial transactions involving the Living Vine Fellowship Building Fund. Pastor Vance. I am sorry, the what? Agent Holloway. The building fund, the restricted account. Pastor Vance. I think there has been some kind of misunderstanding. The elder board did not tell me anyone from the state was going to be here. Let me call Deacon Pryor. Agent Holloway. Deacon Pryor is the one who contacted us, Pastor. There is a pause on the footage. 8 seconds. Pastor Vance is seated in his own chair behind his own desk. His hands are flat on the leather portfolio in front of him. He does not look up. Pastor Vance. I have always acted in the best interest of this ministry. Agent Holloway. Pastor, can you explain the transfer of $41,000 from the building fund on April 18th of last year? Pastor Vance. Every dollar I have moved has been authorized. Agent Holloway. Authorized by whom, Pastor? There is a longer pause this time. 19 seconds. He shifts in his chair. He looks at the bookcase to his right. There is a framed photograph on the top shelf of him with his wife and son. He looks at it for a long time. Pastor Vance. I want to call my attorney. Agent Holloway. That is your right, Pastor. We are placing you under arrest. The charges are theft by taking, fraud, and money laundering. Please stand up and turn around. He stood up. He turned around. The uniformed officer placed the handcuffs on him over his suit jacket. He did not say another word inside the office. As they walked him through the lobby of his own church, past the glass display case with the chrome ceremonial shovel mounted on velvet, he kept his eyes on the carpet. The arrest made the local news that evening and the regional news by the next morning. By the weekend, it was being covered nationally. A megachurch pastor in metro Atlanta, $500,000 from a restricted building fund, a Florida beach house, a fleet of luxury cars, 3 years of slipping groundbreaking dates. The story wrote itself. The DeKalb County District Attorney's Office filed a 14-count indictment within 96 hours of the arrest. Counts 1 through 9, felony theft by taking, 1 count for each calendar year and each major endpoint of the diverted funds. Counts 10 through 12, money laundering, charged under Georgia Code Section 16 to 14-4 for the layered movement of restricted funds through the operating account into personal use endpoints. Count 13, a violation of Georgia's nonprofit corporation statutes governing the misapplication of restricted charitable assets. Count 14, a single broader fraud count covering the 3-year course of conduct. Pastor Vance's defense attorney, a veteran Atlanta criminal lawyer named Philip Hargrove, entered a not guilty plea on his behalf at arraignment the following Tuesday. The bond hearing was set for the day after. The prosecution argued for a $1 million cash bond, citing the documented flight pattern to Florida, the access to liquid assets, and the gravity of the financial crimes. The defense argued for an unsecured signature bond, citing community ties, family obligations, and the absence of any prior criminal history. The judge, a Superior Court judge named Marlon Easterly, split the difference. He set bond at $350,000, secured with electronic monitoring and a prohibition on any contact with current or former members of Living Vine Fellowship outside of immediate family. He spoke for nearly 2 minutes from the bench before signing the order. Some of his words made it into the next morning's paper. This court, the judge said, has no interest in pretending that the position the defendant held is incidental to the conduct alleged. The position is the conduct. Every dollar that is alleged to have been taken was given by a person who believed they were giving toward a sanctuary, toward a place of worship, toward a building that they themselves intended one day to walk into. That is not the kind of money that can be returned with a check. That is the kind of money that pays a tax on the trust of the people who gave it, and the tax is permanent. Bond is set as stated. Living Vine Fellowship's elder board froze every account associated with the senior pastor's office that same week. They retained outside counsel and an interim pastor from a partner congregation in Decatur. They scheduled a series of congregational meetings to walk the membership through the forensic report. The first of those meetings drew 1,800 people on a Wednesday night. Several spoke. Some wept. A retired teacher who had given $12,000 to the building fund over 4 years stood at the open microphone and asked the elders one question: why did nobody count? A widowed grandmother named Lurleen Artis, who had given $1,000 from her late husband's life insurance settlement specifically to the building fund, told a reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, "I gave it because I thought I was giving God a house. He gave himself a beach." The civil litigation began 2 weeks after the indictment. A class action complaint was filed in DeKalb County Superior Court on behalf of every member who had contributed to the building fund between 2018 and 2023. The complaint seeks full restitution, treble damages under Georgia's RICO statute, and the appointment of a receiver to manage the building fund going forward. Pastor Vance's personal assets, including the Lithonia home and the 2 leased properties in Florida, were placed under a pretrial restraining order pending the outcome of the criminal case. The criminal trial has been set for the spring of next year. Pastor Vance is, as of this recording, under house arrest at a relative's home outside the metro area, wearing a GPS monitor on his right ankle. He has not preached since the day of his arrest. The chrome ceremonial shovel was removed from its glass case the week after the indictment and locked in a closet on the 2nd floor of the children's wing. The new sanctuary has not broken ground. The land sits empty, exactly as it has sat for 5 years, waiting. This case was disturbing. But the case on the right-hand side will leave you wondering how anyone trusted this man with so much as a parking ticket. Click it now.